When I, Emily Carter, saw my own parents' number flashing on my phone the night of my wedding, I expected love. What I got were jealous, trembling apologies. Hours earlier, my vows had been broadcast across the city, the kind of moment little girls dream about, but my family hadn't been there to witness it. If you think that sounds unfair, just wait until you hear how deep their betrayal ran. Before we dive in, tell me, where are you watching this from? Drop your city in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The smell of rosemary roast chicken hung heavy in the air, but it didn't mask the sharper scent of something else: favoritism. At our old oak dining table in Phoenix, I sat across from my younger sister, Chloe, who was still glowing like a champagne flute after her latest beauty pageant win. Her silver crown sat on the table beside her plate, as if even during dinner it needed a place of honor. My parents couldn't stop gushing. "Chloe, the way you handled that final round, so poised," my father said, carving his chicken like a man performing in front of an adoring audience. "She's got a glow about her," my mother added, eyes sweeping from Chloe's glossy hair down to her manicured nails. Then, almost like a casual afterthought, she turned to me. "Emily, you might want to start praying for a miracle. Otherwise, we'll have to marry you off to one of those professors you keep writing papers for." Laughter erupted. Chloe's delicate shoulders shook with amusement, and my father chuckled like it was harmless banter. But the words hit me in the chest, sharp as glass. I smiled because that's what was expected. Smile, blend in, don't let them see you flinch. Still, the burn spread through me, a slow ember feeding on years of small jabs. Can you imagine being treated like an uninvited guest at your own family's table? I focused on my plate, cutting the chicken into smaller and smaller pieces just to keep my hands busy. My mind flashed to the psychology quotes I'd copied into my notebook earlier that week. Resilience is the art of thriving despite the odds. I wondered if the author had ever tried to thrive while their mother measured their worth against a younger sibling's pageant sash. Dinner conversations swirled around Chloe, her upcoming photo shoot, a dress sponsorship, the whispers of a state-level crown. Every sentence was a brick in the pedestal they'd built for her, and every polite nod I gave felt like another stone in the wall between us. "Emily," my father said suddenly, jolting me. "How's that college thing going?" I swallowed. "It's going well. Finals are coming up." "That's nice," he said, already turning back to Chloe to ask about her fitness routine. I felt invisible. No, worse than invisible. I was the backdrop against which Chloe's brilliance shone brighter. The thing is, I had learned how to survive moments like these. Control the breathing, steady the hands, keep the smile warm but not too wide. I'd even trained myself to toss in a light laugh, the kind that made it seem like I was in on the joke instead of standing at the center of it. My fork scraped the plate. I looked at Chloe's crown again, catching the light from the old chandelier overhead. The rhinestones glinted, perfect, polished, untouchable. A part of me wondered if she even noticed the imbalance. Or maybe she did, and liked it that way. Mom passed the mashed potatoes to Chloe without asking if I wanted more. The small gesture was nothing on its own, but in this house, small gestures stacked up like evidence in a trial. I pushed back from the table before dessert, claiming I needed to study. My mother gave a mock pout, as if I were depriving her of my delightful company. Chloe just waved with 2 fingers, already mid-story about a spa day she had planned. In my room, I shut the door and leaned against it, listening to their laughter spill down the hallway. It's strange how you can be part of a family and still feel like an outsider. How love can be rationed out like it's in short supply, with someone else always getting the larger share. That night, I told myself it didn't matter. I had my degree to work toward, my own dreams, and someday, maybe a place where the laughter at the dinner table didn't come at my expense. Someday. The campus library never judged me. It didn't ask who wore the crown or who could turn a room with a smile. It just offered a warm pool of amber light, a steady hush of pages turning, and a place where my brain, not my beauty, was the main event. I slid into my favorite corner carrel beneath a brass lamp, the kind with a pulled chain that clicked like a tiny promise. Psychology textbooks spread open around me, cognitive behavioral therapy on one side, developmental psych on the other. A stack of article printouts I'd highlighted so furiously it looked like a sunrise had exploded on the page. On the first line of my notebook, I wrote a sentence I'd copied from a lecture. Resilience isn't the absence of pain. It's the decision not to be defined by it. I underlined decision twice. That word felt like a door only I could open. Between the stacks, students moved like quiet tides. A guy in a Letterman jacket whispered to his girlfriend near the reference desk. The librarian, Mr. Weaver, a gentle man with moon-white hair, pushed a cart, humming under his breath, placing each book back in its exact home. We weren't friends exactly, but he always gave me a small nod that felt like respect. Tonight he paused at my table and set down a bowl of complimentary earplugs. "For midterms," he whispered. "Sanctuary should sound like one." "Thank you," I mouthed. He smiled, rolled his cart away, and the small kindness softened something in my chest I hadn't realized was clenched. I flipped to a clean page and wrote, "My goal, build a life I don't have to shrink inside." The words looked stubborn in a good way. Have you ever decided the world can be cruel and then chosen to study it anyway, just to learn how to outgrow its bite? I set up my system, flashcards by chapter, sticky notes for key terms, a color code so intense it could guide ships at night. Blue for theories, pink for experiments, yellow for the lines that felt like they were speaking directly to me. Self-worth isn't awarded, it's practiced. Yellow, family narratives shape identity, but identity can be rewritten. Yellow, starred, boundaries are the scaffolding of dignity. Yellow, starred, circled. My phone buzzed. Family group chat, renamed by my mother to Carter All-Rounders, because acronyms make everything feel like a team. A photo popped up. Chloe, my younger sister, at a smoothie bar, straw between her teeth, that pageant smile turned to 11. Big day of fittings, send love. 3 seconds later, my father added, "So proud of our girl." Then my mother, "Emily, can you swing by and steam Chloe's backup dress after class? She has a shoot early." I stared at the screen. Not a "how are your exams?" in sight, just a request dressed up as family teamwork. I typed, "Midterms, library, can't tonight." I watched the bubble hover, then vanish as I deleted the exclamation mark I'd added to sound nice. I hit send. A brief pulse of dread lit my stomach, habit, but the feeling faded, replaced by something steadier. Boundaries, scaffolding, dignity. Back to yellow. I buried my phone under my pencil pouch and returned to Pavlov, Skinner, and the puzzle of how much of me was learned behavior. I thought about classical conditioning, how a sound gets paired with a feeling until they're fused, and wondered if I had been trained to laugh every time I was insulted. Bell rings, smile. Joke lands, smile. Little cuts, smile and ask for seconds of mashed potatoes. No, not anymore. A girl I recognized from research methods, her name was Aisha Collins, all brisk ponytail and sharp eyes, stopped by my table. "You always camp here," she said softly, like a compliment. "Guilty." She slid a hand out toward me. "Professor Laird posted a bonus reading list. He said you'd want it." She lowered her voice. "He's kind of obsessed with how you synthesize concepts." Heat rose to my cheeks, embarrassment, then gratitude, then suspicion at my own embarrassment. Why was praise so much harder to hold than a joke at my expense? "Thanks, Aisha. I'll email you my flashcards if you want them." Her eyebrows lifted. "Seriously? Seriously?" There it was again, choice. The same mechanism my family used to make me feel small, flipped like a coin. I could be useful by diminishing myself or by sharing what I was building. I chose the second. When she left, I sank into the sweet rhythm of focus. Time thinned. The amber light became a tide lamp, pulling me out of old currents. I took deep, careful notes on attachment theory, on what happens when caregivers offer inconsistent warmth. I didn't make it about my own house at that oak table. I just let the science sit beside me like a sturdy friend, not asking for anything but my curiosity. At 10, the cafe closed. The smell of coffee faded, replaced by the clean, papery scent of the stacks settling in for the night. I pulled the chain on my brass lamp and watched my little circle of light grow richer. My highlighters lined up like a ribcage of colors. I wrote another quote, one I'd scribbled on a sticky note months ago. "You are allowed to outgrow the roles that kept the peace." I pressed the sticky into the inside cover of my notebook where it would greet me first thing tomorrow. My phone buzzed again. This time, a single message from my mother. "We'll figure it out." No emojis. Not warm, but not a fight either. A neutral sentence like an unpaved road. I set the phone face down and breathed. What would I figure out? Theories, exams, schedules. And the tougher piece. how to keep showing up for myself when my default setting wanted to make everyone else comfortable first. I made a tiny plan in the margin. Office hours with Dr. Laird, Wednesday 2 p.m. Apply for the peer tutoring program, it pays. Run at sunrise 3 times this week. No small jokes at my expense. If someone serves one, let the silence sit. The last line made my stomach flutter. Silence can be louder than laughter. Could I do that? Could I leave a joke hanging until the speaker felt the weight of it instead of catching it like a good sport? The library's grandfather clock chimed once. 11. Mr. Weaver dimmed the rows of lights farther down and left our corner bright for a few more minutes. I took it as permission. Finish strong. I quizzed myself on Piaget's stages, then closed my eyes and described them aloud in a whisper to no one, imagining future clients in soft chairs, future work that mattered because I had put in these quiet hours when the only person watching was me. My voice steadied. The pen I used was cheap but smooth. The kind you buy in bulk and then keep buying because somehow the ink knows how to meet your thought without a scratch. I wrote a final note to myself. Emily, you are building something no one can take by teasing it out of your hands. When I finally packed up, I tucked the notebook under my arm like a small, warm animal. Outside, Phoenix air kissed my cheeks, cooler now, finally giving up on the day's heat. I crossed the plaza past the fountain that always sprayed a little off-center, and I laughed quietly when a rogue drop found my wrist. It felt like the world tapping me on the shoulder, reminding me I was here, moving, choosing. In the parking lot, I paused to look back at the library's glowing windows. I pictured the version of me who would walk across a stage one day, degree in hand, applause washing the old silence away. Not as revenge, as proof. You know what I realized under that brass lamp? Families can write you into a certain part, but they can't stop you from auditioning for a new role when you're ready. And sometimes the rehearsal is just this: a stack of notes, a soft light, and your own voice answering the question, who am I when no one is clapping? On the drive home, the radio murmured oldies and a DJ with a too cheerful voice. I let the noise pass through me. My mind kept returning to that underlined word, decision, and how ordinary it looked on paper. No fireworks, no crown. Just a choice I could make again tomorrow. Back in my room, I propped the notebook on my desk and clicked on a lamp that tried, but failed to imitate the library's glow. I didn't mind. I'd carry that light with me anyway. I slid one last sticky note across the cover so it would be the first thing I saw in the morning. Keep the promise. Then I set my alarm, stretched the ache from my shoulders, and climbed into bed with the quiet satisfaction that today I didn't wait for approval to feel worthy. I practiced it. The stage lights were so bright they felt like they could bleach the loneliness right out of me. I knew better. "Emily Carter," the dean announced, her voice steady over the hum of the auditorium. My heels clicked against the wooden floor as I walked toward the center, the wide sweep of Stanford's psychology graduation stage stretching before me like a finish line I'd been chasing for years. The applause rose, not for me exactly, but for the accomplishment the robe represented. Still, it filled the air in a way that made my chest ache. Rows of strangers clapped. Cameras flashed. A man I'd never met before gave me a respectful nod from the front row. But when I glanced up toward the balcony, where I'd once imagined my family's faces beaming down, there was nothing. Just empty seats and a shadow where their presence should have been. I took the diploma from the dean's hand, smiled for the photographer, and kept my chin high. Inside, though, my thoughts whispered the truth. They didn't come. Not because they couldn't, but because Chloe had a regional pageant that couldn't be missed. Walking off stage, I told myself it didn't matter. I'd learned to stop expecting the parade. But no amount of self-talk could erase the flicker of longing that flared when I saw other graduates run into their parents' arms. Outside, the California sun wrapped itself around me, warm and unapologetic. Clusters of families laughed, posed for photos, and carried bouquets big enough to hide behind. I stood to the side, my diploma tube in hand, pretending to scroll through my phone so no one would notice I was alone. One girl I recognized from seminars, Vanessa, all bright lipstick and louder laughter, rushed past, holding up her phone to capture a selfie with her mom. "We did it!" she beamed, her mom hugging her from behind. The photo burned in my peripheral vision. I slipped away before anyone could ask where my people were. The walk back to my apartment felt longer than usual, my gown trailing like a reminder of all the hours I'd earned. all the nights I'd studied, all the milestones I had crossed by myself. Inside, I set the diploma on my tiny dining table, next to a chipped mug filled with pens. The silence in my apartment was absolute. No voices, no clinking glasses, no congratulations floating from room to room. Just me. After a moment, I opened my laptop. If the day wasn't going to end in celebration, it might as well end in action. I searched top psychology firms San Francisco and started a spreadsheet. Company names, job titles, deadlines. My fingers moved quickly, a rhythm I could control. In between applications, I kept glancing at the diploma as if I needed proof it was real. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a contract with myself. I'd worked too hard for too long to let the absence of applause dictate the weight of my success. By midnight, I'd sent out 6 applications and bookmarked 10 more. Each submitted notification felt like a tiny flare shot into the dark, hope traveling somewhere beyond my quiet apartment. I brewed a cup of tea and carried it to my window, looking out over the street below. San Francisco's lights blinked back at me, scattered and alive. Somewhere in those buildings, people were celebrating milestones I'd never see, and that was fine. My moment didn't need an audience to count. Still, I let myself imagine it, what it would have felt like to walk off that stage into arms that held me close, to hear my name spoken not as a joke, but as pride. The kettle clicked off in the kitchen. I took a sip of my tea, letting the steam curl into my face. The taste was steady, grounding. I'd learned how to hold my own weight. I'd keep learning. That night, I taped a small note to my wall above the desk. Forward is a direction, even if you walk it alone. And I promised myself I'd keep walking. If you'd told me 2 years earlier that I'd one day be standing beneath a crystal chandelier in San Francisco's financial district, wearing a borrowed emerald dress and sipping champagne, I would have laughed. Or maybe I would have rolled my eyes, because back then, those kinds of scenes belonged to other people's lives, not mine. The Brooks and Whitman corporate gala was the kind of event where even the waiters looked like they'd stepped out of a style magazine. The air smelled faintly of lilies and polished wood, the hum of conversation blending with a string quartet playing something delicate and expensive. I was here only because a colleague from my firm had a +1 and insisted I needed to get out. So there I was, feeling like a guest in someone else's dream, when I spotted him, Daniel Brooks. At that moment, I didn't know his last name. I just saw a man in a tailored navy suit, laughing at something the CFO had said, his expression open and unforced. There was something about the way he leaned in when people spoke, like their words deserved real space. I was trying not to stare when I realized he'd noticed me. And then worse, he started walking over. "Evening," he said, voice warm like we'd met before. "I don't think we've been introduced. I'm Daniel." "Emily," I replied, hoping my handshake was neither limp nor crushing. "Emily," he repeated, as if testing the way it sounded. "So what's your verdict on these galas? I'm convinced half the people here only came for the champagne." I smiled before I could help it. "And the other half came for the canapés." His laugh was quick and genuine. "Exactly. Finally, someone who gets it." We found ourselves near the dessert table, swapping quiet observations about the guests. Nothing cruel, just small notes that made the whole thing feel less staged. He had an easy way of keeping a conversation balanced, like a dance where you never quite stepped on each other's toes. At some point, a mutual acquaintance stopped by and in passing said, "Daniel, your father's looking for you." I didn't think much of it, until later, when I overheard someone mention the Brooks family empire, and the fact that Daniel was the heir apparent. It hit me like a flicker of light across glass. This man I'd been talking to about canapé flavors and awkward small talk was the son of the company's owner. When I teased him about keeping that detail quiet, he grinned. "I like to see how people treat me before they know the name. Besides, I don't think it's the most interesting thing about me." There was no arrogance in it, just a calm certainty that caught me off guard. The night ended with him walking me to the curb, hands in his pockets, asking if I'd like to meet for coffee sometime. I hesitated, half out of surprise, half out of habit, but then I said yes. As the rideshare pulled away, I glanced back through the car window and saw him still standing there, watching until I turned the corner. For the first time in a long time, I felt the faint pull of something I'd almost stopped believing in, possibility. That night, Lying in bed with the city lights flickering through my blinds, I replayed our conversation. It wasn't just that he'd been charming. Plenty of people could do that. It was the way he'd asked questions and actually listened, how he seemed to notice the space between my words without trying to fill it with his own. I didn't know what would come of it, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was standing outside my own life, looking in through the glass. I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was being invited inside. Daniel's world moved at a pace I'd never known. Meetings stacked on meetings, phone calls at odd hours, entire afternoons swallowed by negotiations with people whose shoes probably cost more than my monthly rent. And yet, when the last email was sent and the last call ended, he always seemed to find his way to the couch beside me. It started with small rituals. I'd bring him tea, ginger with honey when he looked pale from stress, chamomile when the lines between his brows had deepened over the day. He'd thank me like I'd done something extraordinary, even though it was just water and leaves. We'd sit in the penthouse living room, the bay stretched out in front of us like a black mirror sprinkled with gold. The lights of the bridge blinked in the distance, and sometimes fog would curl against the glass, making the city feel like it belonged only to us. He told me things I didn't expect, the doubts he had about leading the company, the weight of living up to a father who never really left the boardroom, the fear of making the wrong call in a room full of people paid to nod. In return, I told him pieces of my own story, though I edited out the sharper edges. I mentioned my degree, my first job, the way I'd had to build most of my adult life without a net. I didn't yet tell him how deep the cracks in my family ran. That felt like a chapter for later. But I could feel trust building between us, like a bridge we were both laying plank by plank. One night, after a brutal day of contract disputes, he collapsed onto the sofa beside me and groaned. "You ever wish you could just disappear for a week? No phone, no people, just quiet." "All the time," I said, curling my legs under me. "But I think we'd get bored after day 2. He smirked. "Speak for yourself." Then softer, "Actually, you're probably right. I'd miss this." "This." He glanced toward the tea on the coffee table, then back at me. "You, the calm." It was such a simple sentence, but it landed in a place no one had touched in years. After that, our talks went longer. We started watching old movies, black and white ones with quick dialogue and glances that said more than the lines. We made up alternate endings for them, sometimes ridiculous, sometimes heartbreakingly sweet. I began to see that for all his money and name recognition, Daniel was a man who valued the same things I did. Quiet moments, honest conversation, a sense that someone was listening without waiting for their turn to speak. When he inherited the company officially, after months of legal tangles and late-night strategy sessions, I stood beside him at the press conference, just out of frame from the cameras. He kept looking toward me as if grounding himself, and afterward, when the reporters swarmed his father, he slipped his hand into mine for a second. Just a second. Enough. At home, he poured 2 glasses of wine and toasted me, not the company. "To the person who kept me sane," he said. It was in those nights, the quiet, the laughter, the way the city's noise seemed to fade when we were together, that I started to believe in something I hadn't dared to before, a future that felt safe. Not perfect, not without storms, but safe in the way a harbor is safe. You still hear the wind, but you know you're anchored. And for a woman who'd spent her life treading water, that meant everything. The first thing I noticed when I walked into my parents' house that Sunday was the smell, lemon polish and roast beef, the exact same combination from my childhood. It was a scent that could have been comforting if it weren't tangled up with so many memories I'd rather not revisit. Daniel and I had flown into Phoenix for the weekend. He was at a meeting that morning, so I came alone, telling myself it would be easier this way. No introductions yet, just a short visit. The moment I stepped into the living room, Chloe's voice floated from the kitchen. "Emily's here," she called, like it was a novelty. She appeared a moment later in a flowy pink blouse, hair curled to pageant perfection even for a Sunday lunch. Her face lit up not for me, but because she'd just finished telling my mother about her big weekend shopping trip in Scottsdale. I knew because the conversation picked up exactly where it had left off. I told the sales girl I wanted something effortless but glam, and she knew exactly what to pull, Chloe said, spinning her wrist to show off a charm bracelet that jingled like applause. My mother clapped her hands together. She has an eye, doesn't she? You always have, my father added from his recliner. Remember when you picked your prom dress? That store still uses you as an example. I smiled faintly, lowering my purse onto the side table. How's everyone been? Oh, fine, my mother said, not quite making eye contact. Chloe's been so busy, photo shoots, fittings. She's thinking about competing nationally this year. That's great, I said and meant it, though the weight in my voice probably made it sound otherwise. We sat down at the dining table, the same oak one from my childhood, its surface so polished I could see the overhead light reflected in it. My father carved the roast, Chloe poured herself sparkling water from a glass pitcher, and I helped myself to mashed potatoes because no one thought to pass them my way. When the conversation shifted to me, it was almost theatrical in its brevity. So, work is still psychology stuff? My father asked, like I might have abandoned my career on a whim. Yes, still psychology stuff, I said lightly. And Daniel's been busy with the company. That reminds me, Chloe cut in. I found this gorgeous silk dress on sale, perfect for the gala next month. She launched into a detailed description of the neckline while my parents leaned in, hanging on every word. I let my fork rest on my plate, chewing slowly, listening. I'd been in enough family dinners to recognize the pattern. When Chloe spoke, the air in the room shifted, like everyone wanted to align themselves with her light. My own updates, my degree, my work, my life were background noise at best. But here's the thing, this time I didn't feel the sting I used to. Not exactly. I felt distance. Like I was watching a play I'd already memorized, each line delivered exactly as expected. After dessert, a lemon tart Chloe helped choose from a bakery. My mother leaned toward her. Next time you're in LA, you should do another professional photo set. You'd look amazing against a desert backdrop. Oh, definitely, Chloe said, then glanced at me with a smile that didn't quite touch her eyes. Emily, maybe you could take a few casual shots for me, too. You've got a good phone camera, right? I swallowed a laugh, not from humor but from the absurdity. I'll have to see if my schedule allows it, I said evenly. The room went quiet for half a beat, then my father chuckled like I'd made a joke, and the conversation drifted back to Chloe's bracelet. By the time I left, the sun was low, casting long shadows across the driveway. I sat in my rental car for a moment, hands on the wheel, letting the hum of the air conditioner drown out the echo of the dining room. The favoritism wasn't new. The indifference wasn't new. But something inside me had shifted. I no longer needed them to notice my life to believe it mattered. I glanced at my phone, considering calling Daniel to tell him about the visit. Then I decided I'd wait until I saw him later, when I could tell the story with a little humor, maybe even a touch of irony. Because if there was one thing this weekend had reminded me, it was that the script they were reading from wasn't mine anymore. And soon, they'd see just how much the ending had changed. The night Daniel finally came to meet my family, I could feel the shift in the air before we even reached the driveway. His silver Maserati purred like it knew it didn't belong on this quiet suburban street. The headlights swept across the front of the house, catching the curtains in the living room twitching, someone peeking out. Daniel parked with the same ease he did everything else, but my palms were already damp. I'd spent hours wondering how this would go. Would my parents be polite? Would Chloe find a way to make it about her? The front door opened before we'd even reached the porch. My mother appeared in a neatly pressed blouse, smiling a little too widely. Daniel, we've heard so much about you. Daniel returned the smile, offering her a bouquet of lilies I'd suggested, her favorite, though I doubted she'd remember ever telling me that. Inside, my father shook his hand firmly, his eyes flicking, just once toward Daniel's watch. Chloe was last to appear, stepping into the room in a fitted black dress and heels, like she'd just come from an event instead of the couch. Her smile was bright, but her gaze moved over Daniel with an appraisal I knew too well. Dinner was restrained. My mother asked about his work, her voice carefully casual. My father inquired about company things, but didn't press for details, as if afraid of revealing how much he wanted to know. Chloe laughed more than the conversation warranted, her eyes darting between Daniel and me. At one point, while Daniel was answering a question about his recent project, Chloe leaned toward me and murmured, "He must be busy, I bet you hardly see him." I kept my voice even. "We make it work." She tilted her head, smiling like she'd just won something, though I couldn't see what. By dessert, store-bought cheesecake my mother claimed was just as good as homemade. The air felt heavier. My parents exchanged quick glances I couldn't quite read. Daniel, ever gracious, thanked them warmly for the meal, complimenting the roast chicken and making a joke about needing the recipe. When we finally stepped outside, the air was cooler, the quiet of the neighborhood pressing in. Daniel opened my door, waited until I was seated, then slid into the driver's seat. He didn't start the car right away. "That was interesting," he said finally, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. I exhaled, my tension releasing all at once. "You have no idea." "I think I might," he said, starting the engine. As we drove away, I glanced back at the house. The living room light was still on, silhouettes moving behind the curtain, watching. And I had the sinking feeling that this night had set something in motion, something I wouldn't be able to stop. The package arrived on a Tuesday, 1 week before the wedding. I almost didn't open it right away. There was no return address, and I'd been expecting a delivery from the boutique instead. But the box was big, heavier than I imagined fabric should be. I carried it into the kitchen, sliced through the tape, and peeled back the flaps. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. My wedding gown, folded in a way that felt careless, was streaked with something deep and violent. Red slashes ran down the bodice, bleeding into the lace, pooling at the hem like a slow-moving wound. The smell hit me next, chemical, sharp. Paint. There was a note tucked under the fabric. No greeting, no signature, just a sentence scrawled in my mother's tidy cursive. Something unfortunate happened to the dress. We've gone to the resort for a few days. I read it twice, then a third time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into an apology. They didn't. My hands started to shake, not just from the destruction in front of me, but from the clarity that came with it. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't unfortunate. It was deliberate, meant to wound in a way that would be hard to repair before the ceremony. I sank into one of the kitchen chairs, the note still in my hand. My mind flickered between disbelief and a slow, rising fury. They knew what this meant to me. They knew how carefully I'd chosen that gown, how I'd imagined walking toward Daniel with it floating around me like a promise. And now, ruined. For a moment, I considered calling my mother, but I could already hear her voice, syrupy and smug, assuring me it was just bad luck and surely you can find something else. That tone that always left me wondering if I'd imagined the malice. The edges of my vision pulsed. I pressed my palms to the table, steadying myself. I wouldn't cry here, not over them. I pulled the dress fully from the box, spreading it across the kitchen tile. The red paint had seeped into nearly every layer, staining the silk like a permanent mark. Whoever had done it hadn't just wanted to damage it, they'd wanted to make sure it could never be worn. I thought of Daniel, of the way he'd look at me when I walked toward him, of the people who would be there, not just for him but for us. And I thought of my parents, sipping cocktails at some resort, maybe laughing about how dramatic my reaction would be. The shaking in my hands stilled. A different kind of energy took its place, cold, focused. If they wanted to make me small, they were about to learn how much space I could take up. By the time Daniel came home that evening, the ruined gown was folded back into the box and shoved into the corner like a body I didn't want to look at. I'd sat on the couch for an hour, staring at nothing, rehearsing how to tell him without making it sound like a plea for pity. When he walked through the door, I tried to start casually. "Something happened today." It only took one look at my face for him to set down his briefcase and sit beside me. "Tell me." I told him everything, the package, the paint, the note. My voice stayed even until I got to the part about my parents leaving for the resort, and then it cracked. Not from sadness, but from the absurdity of it all. Daniel's jaw tightened. "We'll fix it," he said simply. I shook my head. "The dress is ruined. There's no time." "There's always time," he said, pulling out his phone. "My mother will know what to do." An hour later, we were driving up the long, tree-lined road to his parents' estate in Napa. The late afternoon light spilled gold across the vineyards, the air warming with that faint sweetness only wine country carries. Evelyn Brooks met us at the door. She was the kind of woman who could command a room without raising her voice. Silver hair swept into a chignon, pearl earrings, eyes that missed nothing. When I told her what happened, she didn't gasp or cluck her tongue. She took my hands in hers, steady and warm. "We'll take care of this," she said, like it was already decided. She led me to her car before I could protest. "There's a boutique I trust. The owner is a friend. We'll find you something better. The boutique was tucked into a side street, its front window glowing in the early evening light. Inside, the scent of fresh lilies drifted through the air, mingling with the faint trace of fabric and perfume. A woman in her 60s, all linen and gold bangles, greeted Evelyn with a kiss on the cheek and turned her attention to me like I was the only customer in the world. She didn't ask for my budget. She didn't ask how fast I needed it. She simply disappeared into the back and returned with an armful of gowns that looked like they belonged in dreams. Evelyn sat in a velvet chair while I tried them on, offering small, pointed suggestions, never telling me what to choose, only reminding me to look at myself, not the price tag. When I stepped out in the last gown, a silk creation that moved like water, the owner's smile told me everything. Evelyn rose, came to stand beside me in the mirror, and rested a hand lightly on my back. "This," she said, "this is the one." And for the first time that day, I felt the knot in my chest loosen. Not because the dress was perfect, though it was, but because someone had stood beside me without question, without condition. That night, as we drove back to the estate, the new gown safely in the back seat, I realized something. Family isn't always who raises you. Sometimes it's who steps in when the people who did raise you choose not to. The morning of the wedding broke soft and golden, sunlight spilling through the tall windows of the guest suite at Daniel's parents' estate. From the balcony, I could see the vineyard stretching in neat rows toward the horizon, the leaves rustling in a light breeze that felt like a blessing. Inside, the air hummed with quiet movement. Evelyn had insisted I spend the night there, so you'll wake up surrounded by people who are on your side. She wasn't wrong. In the next room, I could hear her and the housekeeper discussing the seating arrangements one last time, their voices calm, purposeful. I sat at the vanity, bare-faced for the moment, just watching the morning light shift across the polished wood. My new gown hung nearby, draped in its protective cover, the silk catching glints of light even through the fabric. There was no rush. Hair and makeup were scheduled for later, but I felt a nervous energy buzzing under my skin. Not the panicked kind, but the kind that made me aware of every breath, every sound. Downstairs, I could hear the muted murmur of guests arriving early, mingling on the sunlit lawn. Someone laughed, the sound floating up through the open balcony door. String lights swayed gently above the tables, already set with white linens and fresh flowers. Somewhere in the crowd, I knew there were reporters ready to capture every polished detail. Evelyn appeared in the doorway, a soft smile on her face. "How are we doing in here?" I smiled back. "Good. Calm. Surprisingly calm." She came over, adjusted the shoulder of my robe like a mother might. "That's how it should be. Everything else is handled. You just have to walk out there and marry the man you love." Her words settled over me like a warm blanket. I thought of the chaos of the last week, the streaks of red on my ruined dress, the note from my parents that had felt like a final, deliberate cut. And yet, here I was, in a place that smelled of fresh lilies and wine country air, surrounded by people who were rooting for me. When the stylist arrived, the room filled with the quiet rhythm of brushes against skin, pins sliding into hair. Every so often, Evelyn would pop her head in, bringing a glass of water or just a reassuring glance. By the time I slipped into the gown, the nerves had settled into something steadier, a grounded kind of anticipation. I caught my reflection in the full-length mirror, the silk moving like a living thing as I turned. This was the moment I'd imagined, but it didn't look exactly like I'd pictured. It looked better. Not because it was perfect, but because I'd fought for it, not just the dress, but the space to feel at peace in it. As I walked to the door, ready to step into the sunlight, I took one last deep breath. The calm stayed with me, anchored by the simple truth Evelyn had given me. I wasn't walking into this day alone. If you've ever had your life broadcast on television, you'll know the strangest part isn't the cameras. It's the way people look at you afterward. The ceremony unfolded beneath a sky so clear it felt staged. The vineyard rolled away behind us, guests shaded by white parasols, the scent of lilies weaving through the warm air. When I took Daniel's hands, the rest of it blurred. The chairs, the murmurs, the faint click of shutters. All I saw was him. Our vows felt private despite the microphones. His voice caught once. Mine held steady, though my heart was hammering. And when we kissed, the crowd erupted. Not just polite applause, but genuine, unguarded joy. By the time the reception began, I was aware of the cameras only in flashes, at the edge of the dance floor near the cake, by the table where Evelyn and I laughed over something no one else heard. I didn't know then that the footage would air on the local evening news, or that a short clip would spread online by morning. It wasn't until that night when Daniel and I were back in the quiet of the estate that I saw my phone. Messages stacked in the hundreds. Friends from college, coworkers, distant relatives, and then, inevitably, my parents. First, my mother, we saw the ceremony, beautiful, we were wrong. Then, Chloe, you looked amazing, we should talk. Followed by my father, proud of you, kiddo, the words were right, the timing was not. I didn't answer that night. Instead, I set the phone down and let the quiet sink in. Daniel noticed, but he didn't press. Some conversations are better after you've decided how you want to end them. 3 days later, I texted my parents and Chloe. Let's meet. Cafe Verona, Friday at 3. The cafe smelled of espresso and fresh bread when I walked in. They were already there, my father with his hands wrapped around a mug, my mother in a cardigan too warm for the weather, Chloe scrolling her phone until she saw me. We exchanged the usual greetings, but I didn't sit right away. Before we start, I need to say something. My voice didn't waver. My life belongs to the people who celebrate it, not diminish it. What happened with the dress, that wasn't just a prank. It was cruelty, and it's not something I'll ignore. My mother opened her mouth, but I held up a hand. You can apologize if you want, but an apology isn't enough unless the behavior changes. Chloe shifted in her seat. No, I said, sharper now. You didn't just. You made a choice. I'm making mine. From now on, I'll decide when and how we see each other. If that feels like distance, it's because I'm protecting myself. Silence stretched between us, heavy and unfamiliar. My father looked down at his coffee. My mother's lips pressed thin. Chloe tapped her phone screen as if the glow there might distract her from what she'd just heard. I stood. That's all I came to say. The bell over the cafe door jingled as I left. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright enough to make me squint. I walked toward my car with no hurry, my phone still silent in my bag. Some part of me expected a rush of guilt, but it didn't come. What came instead was a steady, blooming calm. Not the fragile calm before a storm, but the kind that follows one. The air washed clean, the sky wide open. And for the first time, I knew this wasn't the end of something. It was the start.